I'd like you to meet Jocelyn, known as Joss, and we thought it'd be really good to just raise awareness about hysteroscopies as a general. So why would you have a hysteroscopy? Recommendations from NICE with regards to pain relief and post-recovery. And Joss is involved with the hysteroscopyaction.org.uk. That's the website with lots of information and useful links, and I will put the website link in the description of the YouTube, and also I will put the link in for Campaign Against Painful Hysteroscopy, and I'm going to pass over to Jocelyn, but those links will be within the YouTube description so that anybody who wants to can then find them. Joss, all over YouTube. To you, my darling. I'm getting my words in a muddle.
Thank you. So yes, I mean, thanks for talking to me about this morning, because the more social media coverage we have, the more women we're finding who have had really painful hysteroscopies. And the first thing I wanted to say is that on no account do we want to scare women off from having the procedure. I mean, it's a really important procedure. It's very common. We estimate that about 70,000 are carried out in this country every year. And it's used for such a wide variety of things. So it's used to investigate anything to do with the womb. So abnormal bleeding, postmenopausal bleeding, if you've lost an IUD, if you need to investigate or have treatment for fibroids or polyps. So anything that, if the doctor needs to see inside your womb with a camera, then it's likely that you'll end up having a hysteroscopy. So what is a hysteroscopy? So essentially, it's a procedure whereby a long, thin, rigid metal tube with a camera on the end is inserted through the vagina, through the entrance to the womb, through the cervix, and into the womb itself. And then once it's in there, it'll feed back live images to the doctor to see what's going on. And the hollowness of the tube allows the doctor to insert small medical implements with which they can take a biopsy of the womb. They can remove and treat small fibroids or polyps. So huge variety of purpose, very common. The issue comes with the information that patients are generally provided via the standard hospital patient information leaflets, and how that doesn't tie in with the guidance provided by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So I'll explain how it doesn't tie up. So generally speaking, if you have to go for a hysteroscopy and you are lucky enough to be given a patient information leaflet in the first place, that patient information leaflet will often say, it's a straightforward procedure. Take a couple of paracetamol, ibuprofen before you turn up. You may experience a little bit of discomfort, something like mild period pain, but essentially not giving you any reason for concern. So most women turn up and have the procedure without any knowledge that there is a chance that it will be very painful. So the flip side of that is the RCOG, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, have produced data which suggests that 35% of women will find the procedure extremely painful. And in none of the patient information leaflets will you find that information. So again, coming back to not wanting to scare women, 2/3 of women will have no massive issues with the procedure. They estimate a third will find it completely acceptable. A third may find it sort of get some discomfort, but nothing too horrendous. But we're talking a third of women, and we're talking 70,000 procedures a year, will find this procedure extremely painful.
Yeah,
so
Joss, I got the NHS guidance with this as well. And on the NHS guidance, it said it recommends patients to tell the practitioner in advance if you have painful periods that make you faint, if you've had painful vaginal examinations or cervical smears in the past. And actually, I just wonder how many women actually get asked those questions, because you wouldn't necessarily know to ask those or to put that forward to your health provider. And I think where your information is so useful is just giving us the heads up, so we can make that informed choice and not feel afraid. That's what we don't want, is it? We don't want people to be afraid. It's about having that informed choice so that actually you can go in there confidently.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the old knowledge is power thing, isn't it? You need to know,
Yeah.
and also these days it is a legal requirement for a patient to give informed consent. So after the Montgomery ruling, which I think was 2015, without a patient needs to have full information about what's happening to them to be able to give an informed decision as to what they want to happen to their body. And without being given the information in a patient information leaflet, essentially you can't give informed consent. So you're right, the NHS guidance is mirrored in the RCOG guidance. So they also mentioned that you may want to consider having the hysteroscopy done not as an outpatient, so under sedation or under anaesthesia, if you faint during periods because of pain, if you've had previous painful vaginal examinations, if you've had difficult or painful smear tests, if you've previously had traumatic experiences that may make it difficult. But also the RCOG say if you simply don't want the procedure awake, you don't have to have it awake. They also say, and I'll read this to you, their guidelines say, the procedure can be associated with significant pain, anxiety, and embarrassment. It says all women must be offered from the outset the option of GA, or if it's available, conscious sedation, and it must be stopped if it's too painful. And it doesn't have to be the patient that stops it. It can be the doctor carrying out the procedure. It can be any of the nurses present that can stop the procedure, but it must be stopped and it must be rescheduled with additional pain relief under a GA, under sedation with additional anaesthesia.
Okay.
So it's quite black and white what the expectation is. What isn't black and white is what's put in the patient information leaflets.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And you with a team of others have got a campaign going out. What is the campaign actually asking or saying, and what are you doing with that campaign?
Okay, so the campaign's run by a team of amazing women. It's all voluntary. It's a real shoestring budget campaign. We do everything based on sort of minimal donations from supporters. We've been going for over 10 years now. The MP Lynn Brown, who has been a superb advocate for the campaign, has now mentioned it 11 times in Parliament to various health ministers, and still nothing's changed, and still she's fighting for us. So what do we want? So we want informed consent for all women, so that a range of effective anaesthesia and analgesia is offered. So not just the assumption that you will go down the outpatients route. If you go for a colonoscopy, for example, you are automatically offered IV sedation with analgesia. We want the same for hysteroscopy. We don't want the presumption to be outpatients. We want truthful information about the 35% likelihood of severe pain to be included in the patient information leaflets. And we want the proposed grift targets scrapped. So the NHS are looking at introducing something called getting it right first time targets. And they getting it right first time, it's a national programme, and it says it's designed to improve the treatment and care of patients through an in-depth review of services. So the NHS is proposing, as a result of these new targets, that 90% of hysteroscopies and biopsies will be done in outpatients. So you've got a massive disconnect there where they want targets of 90% done as outpatients, but the RCOG is already acknowledging that 35% of women are going to find the process extremely painful. So we want those targets scrapped. Very simple, very straightforward, very obvious, but...
And I'm kind of lost for words, which anybody who knows me, that's not very often. Because like you say, the disconnect there is huge. It's huge. And we understand, don't we, the strain that the NHS is under. But we need to also feel safe at the same time. And I guess it literally boils down to time, money, the funding available, the staff that are available, the rooms that are available. It's all down to that, which we know is really stretched.
Yeah.
I think this conversation is great, just because I've not had one. The chances are at some point I will, and absolutely there will be friends of mine that are having them. In fact, after we had our first conversation, just discussing about doing this, I put the question out to a couple of Facebook groups that I'm an admin of, and I had 100 replies of responses within a few hours, and there was one lady that was going in the following morning. And so I was able to signpost her to your website to just sort of like say, just be informed, don't be afraid, but be informed, because actually you're the one in control. And that made a huge difference to her. She went in more prepared and was able to ask questions. I have to say that when she asked the questions, it was sort of like, kind of like, what, you know, you got the paracetamol and that you're hearing scary information, but then she signposted them to your website and then they went quiet.
Oh, good, excellent. That's really good. And it, as I said before, it certainly isn't about scaring women. It's a really important procedure to have done. But the flip side of that is, if you go in unprepared for a chance of pain, and it's very difficult to know if you're going to be one of those 1 in 3 that is going to find it incredibly painful. So if you go in knowing that there's a chance of that, and if you do find it too painful, you can put a stop to it and you can ask for it to be rescheduled under sedation or GA. It means that long term your gynae health is not going to suffer, because we hear from so many women who have been through a really traumatic hysteroscopy who are too frightened then to go back for even a simple smear test.
Yeah.
And anything else, you know, investigative or invasive, they're not going to go.
That came across in the feedback when I put the question out. And the only question I put out was, can I ask if you would share if you've had a hysteroscopy and the experience? And that it was something on that line. It wasn't a loaded question. It was like, I'm just sort of like doing a little bit of like interest question here, random question. You know, your thoughts. And there just was, because the 1 in 3, no problem, they sail through.
Yeah.
Then there's another 1 in 3 that find it uncomfortable, from what I gather. And then there's that 1 in 3, it's not just painful necessarily, it's excruciating is the word that I kept hearing. Like I blacked out on the toilet floor immediately after the procedure because of the pain. And I definitely don't have a low pain threshold, but I was made to feel it was my fault. And I was made to feel a bit useless. There is just so many. I couldn't even begin to read them all. I just could not. I mean, like, I'm just shocked, really. And I feel like I should read them all out, but it would take up too much time. How about if you share your journey? Because this is kind of what started it all off. What happened to you so that somebody can actually realize what we're talking about and why we need this 1 in 3 women to be protected and supported.
Okay, yeah. So I had my daughter when I was 35, and after I'd finished breastfeeding her, I went straight into menopause at the age of about 36. So after a bit of toing and froing, various blood tests and that, the doctors finally acknowledged that it was likely that I had gone into early menopause. So that was fine, dealt with that and carried on dealing with that. And a few years later, I had some bleeding. So I went back to the doctors, because obviously this is now classed as postmenopausal bleeding. And the doctor did the right thing, put me on the 2-week cancer pathway to go to get it checked out via a hysteroscopy in the outpatients department at my local hospital. And I had the standard leaflet through. It said you may get a bit of discomfort, take a couple of paracetamol before you go, which I did do. So I turned up for the appointment and I went in to sign the consent form. And I'm a bit of a I like to know a little bit about everything. I like to know what's going to happen to me. So I'd done a bit of research before and hadn't come across a great deal of information. But I had read that if you're postmenopausal, the chances are that your cervix is pretty tightly closed, and therefore the process of inserting a rigid metal tube may be painful. So I said to the doctor, I said, I may only be sort of, I think I was early 40s at the time, 40s. I have been in menopause for quite a few years. I have read that it may be painful. Can you reassure me one way or the other? And he asked me if I'd had children and whether I'd had a vaginal birth, and I said yes. And he said, oh, you'll be absolutely fine then. And that was it. So I signed the consent form, went into the procedure room, totally unprepared for what was going to happen and how I was going to feel. And as soon as they inserted the hysteroscope, the pain was just off the scale. I had two nurses at the top of me, either shoulder chatting, which I now know is called a vocal local. So it's a distraction technique, isn't it, basically? And I can't even remember how many other people in the room. I know there was the doctor carrying out the procedure and a couple of others behind him. So it was quite a small room, quite a lot of people in there. Me on the bed in a very vulnerable position, in absolute agony. And I could feel myself, the nurses were chatting, and I could feel myself sort of passing in and out of consciousness, thinking, don't faint, don't faint. But I was just, I was not in any kind of state to be able to make a sensible request to ask the doctor to stop the procedure. And part of me was thinking, I'm here to find out if I've got cancer, so I need to carry on with this. And at that point, I now know that those nurses and that doctor should have said, this is too painful to continue. We know you're here for a very important investigation, but we're going to stop it because it's not fair on you, and we'll rearrange it, and you can come back and have some sedation or have a general anaesthetic, and we'll get to the bottom of it. I know waiting lists are long, but we shouldn't be made to feel that the fact that we maybe haven't got a high pain threshold means that we're a failure in some way, because a high pain threshold isn't a prerequisite for a medical procedure. So it still makes me upset to talk about it now, and it's years ago. So they finished, touch wood, they found nothing, and I'm extremely grateful that they didn't. But I was put in the little side room to get myself dressed. And I can remember sitting there thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get myself dressed here. I literally was a mess, because they inject water into the womb as well to expand the womb to allow the camera to get better pictures. So I felt in a mess. I had to get myself dressed, which I did eventually. I was taken out to the waiting room, where fortunately I'd taken my partner with me, and he was waiting. And I think he took one look at the state I was in and thought, goodness, they found something. And I obviously reassured him that they hadn't found anything. But my body had just gone into shock.
Yeah.
And I sat in the waiting room with him for probably about an hour before I was able to walk back to the car. I tried a couple of times, and each time I stood up, my blood pressure just plummeted and I was about to faint again. And the nurses sat me down and gave me a cup of tea and a biscuit or something to try and get them, calm down, get my blood pressure up. And so after about an hour, I finally made it back to the car, went home, just went to bed and cried myself to sleep, and tried to sort of process what had happened, because it was just completely unexpected. And I think that time goes by, doesn't it? And you kind of put it to one side, and I just felt angry that I hadn't been provided with any kind of knowledge as to what I might expect in reality.
And support.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And funnily enough, and we've heard this from many women, that the waiting room where you go into, at my hospital, where you go in to have the procedure done, is the other side of the waiting room from where you come out. And we've heard from many, many women where that happens, because the women waiting to go in don't necessarily want to see those 1 in 3 women coming out the other side looking horrendous. Absolutely, absolutely. So then I went online, I found the campaign, I contacted the campaign, and eventually became one of the admin and involved in the campaign to try and get things changed, really. So that's my story.
And I think I'm going to bring it back to the campaign. Anybody who's watching this and they actually need to share their experience to the campaign, because that is leverage for when Lynn Brown goes to Parliament. That's leverage for you. That's patient stories are important.
Massively.
Yeah.
We've got on our website, as soon as you go onto the homepage of our website, you get a little pop-up box, and it contains a link to our anonymous patient survey. So we've now, in a relatively short space of time, collated over 6,000 absolutely horrific patient stories. And they're utterly heartbreaking to read, because none of these should have happened. Women should have been given the right information to know that there was a chance of severe pain.
Yeah. And in fact, one of these, because again, it's about being balanced with this. So one lady's put, I've had a traumatic experience of hysteroscopy, only offered the one paracetamol, but then I also had a better one, because again, this is it. Sometimes women will need to have a couple over a lifetime or more. And so actually, maybe on her second one she had anaesthetic, maybe she didn't, I don't know. But yeah, there's different, and I have got a couple that have said yes, it was okay, but then there's just, like I say, there is over 100, and that was within a few hours. And I was quite shocked, actually. I'd heard what you had to say and I took it all on board, but when you just put a random question, you get so many answers come back. Yeah, well, so ladies, gentlemen, husbands, partners, I think that it's about sharing the knowledge, so that then when your loved ones have a hysteroscopy, they are fully informed to just be aware of the risk factors that are more likely to mean that it's more uncomfortable or painful, and the things that you can ask for, and to know that you can request for the procedure to stop and it can be rescheduled, and with the appropriate pain relief. And that's the whole essence of this recording. And I'm hoping it was fairly balanced, because we love balance and we love evidence. And the work you're doing, Joss, is absolutely amazing with the rest of your team. And thank you to Lynn Brown and to your campaign and to your website with all of the useful links. I really appreciate it. And so many other women will be appreciating it too, for their mothers, their daughters, their aunties, their best friends, their sisters. You know, we need to do this more talking, and that's everything I'm about, and you're obviously about too. So thank you. Is there anything that you need to add before we finish?
I don't think so. I think the only thing I would say is that if you have got a hysteroscopy coming up and you've had a patient information leaflet and you do want to access more information, obviously our website's there. But if you simply Google RCOG green top guidelines for hysteroscopy, you will find the RCOG. It's a simple page where it tells you exactly what they consider the risk factors to be for pain and what exactly you are entitled to ask for. And if it's just simply that you don't want to be awake for it and you haven't perhaps got any of those deemed risk factors, you are quite entitled to say, I don't want to be awake for it. Please arrange for sedation if it's available, or an anaesthetic.
Brilliant, because having our checkups are so important, everybody, and we need to have them. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Joss. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on to talk about it.
Oh, well, I really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thanks.